So welcome to Making Sense of BOK 3.0 using systems thinking. We're thrilled that you were all here live, and thank you to our special guest, Dean, for being here. And we're going to really talk about the updated book of knowledge. It contains a ton of information, excellent information that you need to pass the IASP exams. However, it may not be the easiest document to make sense of and to study from. So what we're going to do is help you to make sense of it using systems thinking. So Lewe and I use systems thinking all the time. And this is what Lewe and I look like. I'm an IASP pioneer, which means I was part of the group that initially set the association up, and I was on the team that wrote the exam questions. I'm a SMP. I'm located in Calgary, Alberta, and I taught the original exam prep course. And for a few years I was away from it, but now I am back with an updated version for BOK 3.0. I am really looking forward to this session and to back training my IASP people. I'm actually going to be delivering the exam prep workshop next week, November 14th to 17th online. And I'm also going to be doing it again in April for the spring exam cycle. I'm located in Canada, in Western Canada, and I have an interesting background. I have both technical and people side. I have a bachelor of mathematics with a minor in computer science, and I have an MBA with a minor in HR. So that gives me a diverse background, and it gives me also a diverse client base. I've been facilitating and training in strategic management for over 25 years. I work with lots of different kinds of organizations, from profit organizations like energy companies, associations like optometry and pharmacists, and governments like towns and the Alberta government. So Lewe really is taking the systems thinking approach to everything he does. He's part of the Haines Center gang. We want to take system thinking into the mainstream so that we can all think more strategically. His clients ask him to do a variety of things, including systems thinking, program evaluation, facilitation, social impact assessments, strategic planning, strategic management, leadership, entrepreneurship, innovation, economic analysis, change, and technology transfer and adoption. Lewe's worked with a broad range of clients as well, including cattle associations, startups, and social services. So that's why we're here. And the objectives are to solidify your understanding of systems thinking. Most of you understand systems thinking, but we really want to give you even more to solidify that understanding. And then we're going to apply that systems thinking approach to the creation of the BOK, as well as apply it to how to pass the exams. Let's start with a quote by Einstein. I love this quote. Problems that are created by our current level of thinking can't be solved by that same level of thinking. And what I like about this quote is it says there's absolutely nothing wrong with our current level of thinking, but we need to act a little bit differently and think a little bit differently so that we get results. And that different kind of thinking is systems thinking. With using systems thinking, we look at problems at a different level, from outside the chaos, from outside the system. And that's how we'll be able to solve the problems. So that's how we're going to be looking at BOK 3.0 from this vantage point, from above, to help make sense of it.
Thanks, Valerie, and welcome everyone. This is Lewe here from Australia. It's early in the morning here, so I've charged myself up with coffee to keep the show on the road. Just like to give you a bit more insight about the science of systems thinking, or the science of living systems. So there's three principles that I'd like to share with you today about what systems are and what their features can be described as. So first of all, systems can only be understood and defined within a context of the higher level system or environment with in which it exists. So reflecting on the quote from Albert Einstein that was just shared by Valerie. And I also love that quote because quoting Einstein makes you seem very intelligent. So I'll take every opportunity to claim that that mantle from Einstein. But he starts to talk about, when he implies what he says in the quote, that there are different levels of working, different levels of thinking. And it relates back to this first principle of systems thinking, that the reason why one level of a system exists is to serve a higher level purpose of the next level system. And we'll talk a bit more about hierarchy of living systems shortly, but it's a really important concept to understand. So sometimes you have to step up a level to be able to resolve issues that are occurring at the next level down. It sort of makes a lot of sense from a governance perspective when you're thinking about strategy and organizations. The next principle, the second principle, systems are made up of a group of interrelated, and that's a really important concept, interrelated components that work together in support of the objectives of the whole. And that starts to suggest an idea of what systems thinkers call emergent properties of a system, which really means that the individual parts of a system can't achieve a particular outcome in isolation. It's only as a consequence of the way they interact together that this outcome of the system as a whole can be achieved. And that's another really important systems thinking concept. And again, when you reflect on how that might influence strategy, you can think of an organization made up of many parts. At the lowest level, you could think about the individuals who are parts of organizations, but often they contribute to an organization as a part of a team, which in turn coalesce to a level of a business unit, which in turn start to form the whole organization. But really importantly, there's another layer outside the organization, which is often regarded to as customers and stakeholders. And they're ultimately the system that an organization is designed and developed to serve. And then the third principle there on the screen, you can see, if there is no relationship between those parts or components of a system, then you can't call it a system. And that leads us to think about this idea of boundaries that are often created around systems, so you understand what's in a system and what's outside a system. And that notion of boundaries or layers or nesting of systems within systems is another very important concept in the science of living systems. Thanks, Valerie.
Excellent. So we're going to review the systems thinking approach for you.
Thank
As
you,
strategic
Valerie.
thinkers, we try to start on that right-hand side. Right, Lewe?
That's correct. We like to begin in the top right-hand corner, and it's we've broken this idea of the systems thinking approach, the 5 key phases, into 5 parts. And those parts begin in the top right-hand corner. And the interplay between the external environment, which is obviously named as E for external environment, and A, which is understanding the ideal future, have an important codependence, because as we work our way from the top right-hand corner down to the bottom, B, we are starting to understand the interplay between the external environment and the ideal future for an organization or a project that we could describe as a system. And phase B, the bottom area, measures of success, are directly linked to that ideal future in terms of understanding how would we track our progress towards achieving that. And then we move round to C on the left-hand side. So that's the third phase. And we're starting to understand, okay, this is where we are now. What do we need to do in addition to where we are right now, and structure those processes to move towards phase D, this implementation step that will lead us back to A. So that closing the loop notion of a systems diagram is a really important concept. Basic systems diagram, what some people may be familiar with from a perspective of cybernetic thinking about systems, has an input, a throughput, and an output, and then a feedback loop that influences subsequent steps as inputs for action. So that's the basic structure of our ABC model as it relates to a system. If we move to the next slide, we break each of those phases that I've just described into 5 critical questions. The questions themselves are very important, but as is, and probably even more important, is the sequence within which we ask those questions of any particular organisation. The first phase is phase A. Where do we want to be? Top right-hand corner, remembering that is influenced by the changing external environment. Phase B is critical, and we often see in a number of models of strategic planning that we see in operation that this phase is often skipped or left right to the end of this strategic planning cycle. In our case, we think it's really crucial to link how did we know if we get there, measures or key success measures, to evidence of achieving that vision, mission, where do we want to be? And then phase C is, okay, given where we want to be, given now that we know how to get there, where are we right now relative to where we want to be, and what additional things need to be added to the system to allow us to progress to where we want to be? And that involves the implementation phase also, the how do we get there part of it, which leads to the employment of a number of systems thinking concepts as we implement the change that's necessary from moving from where we are now to where we want to be. And that often relates to alterations in processes within an organisation, structures within an organisation, and of course, a cultural shift that may be necessary to achieve the goal of where we want to be. And all of the time ongoing throughout that whole strategy implementation process is a ever-changing external environment that we need to adjust to in order for us to stay on track towards where we want to be, the phase A, vision, mission, and values. Thanks, Valerie. The other concept around systems that's really important to illustrate is this notion of nested living systems. And this is a concept that's not unique to our approach to strategic planning and or systems thinking, but it's a really important concept that leads you to ask the question when you are working on systems that are nested, which systems level are we working at and want to influence? So the diagram on the right-hand side, they look a bit like witches' hats on a training field that you might recall from when you were playing team sports and the coach marked out the field with these cones. At the smallest level, the smallest nested level of the 8 levels of open living systems is that of cells, which then coalesce together, create organs. And of course, organs come together to create individuals of any particular species. They often come together in teams, units, or families, and that grouping again coalesce to organisations which are part of communities, which nest inside societies, and of course are a part of this broadest ecosystem that we all live in, the earth. And of course, it's a very prominent moment in time at the moment as we meet together in Egypt to talk about the impact of all those levels of systems and the influence on that highest level system, the earth and the environment within which we all are a part of. So understanding the boundaries and nesting of these boundaries and how they're each interconnected is also a really important concept in systems thinking and the way we apply it to implementing strategy and facilitating change with organisations as well. 2 key points: nothing exists in isolation. So you change one part, you will influence another part of the system that you're working on, and potentially at a higher level or a lower level of the next higher or lower level system. And that interrelationship or relationships are really crucial to track. Thank you, Valerie.
Excellent. So what we're going to do now is we're going to apply all the concepts that Louis has been talking about in the systems thinking approach to how the BOK 3.0 was created, so you can understand a little bit about it. And then later we're going to apply the same thing to passing the exams. So let's start. So we talked about we like to start with the future as strategic thinkers. So we're going to start at the right-hand side, and we're going to start with the environment. So a future environment scan, we use a tool called Skeptic. There are lots of different tools. The thing that is really good about Skeptic and some other tools is it gets people to think really broadly about the external environment instead of narrowly and, you know, in silos, and the only areas we tend to think about are the things that are on the top of our heads. So this is our tool. If you have another tool, it can actually be brought into the strategic management process here. So our tool looks like this. S is for sociodemographics, so that's anything to do with people, their aging, their immigrating, their attitudes. K is for competition, because we can't spell very well, apparently. And it's competition for the same resources, the same people, the same time, the same money, the same equipment, the same tools, the same amount of leadership attention, as well as substitutes. What else can people use to get to the same end? So, for example, things like butter and margarine would be substitutes, substitutes for different, you know, you can go to a different doctor or a different store or something else. So there's different substitutes. Economics and ecology are E's. And then P is political. We want people to think about both the political and the regulatory situation. And we think of political here both in capital P, politics, which is the town, the region, the state, the province, federal, as well as lowercase p. What are the politics within the organization? Who's changing, who's got power, who's talking to who, who's fighting with who? Technology is a huge one. What's changing in the world of technology that could be impacting us in the future? And then our industry, within the industry that we work in, what's happening with our suppliers, what trends, what concerns, what projections, what opportunities are there? And last, our customer and our citizen is the C. What ideas are they having? What changes do they want? What things are they going through? So here's an example of a future environmental scan that the Hain Center just did in September. And what's important to think about with a future environmental scan is not just getting the what down, getting all of those projections or opportunities or things that could be holding you back. Think about those. So we put those down in the yellow stickies, but we also thought about, so what? what does that mean to us? So we talked about each of those trends that were important. And so what might that mean to us? How might it impact us? What might it mean to us? That's the purple stickies. And then we also talked about now what, which are the orange stickies. It's very important to go through the steps of the discussion, not just to gather data on any kind of future environmental scan, but also to get your people to talk about what is it, so what, and now what? Those are the three big questions. What's happening? So what does that mean to us? And now what are we going to do about it? So we did a real quick future environmental scan on the creation of the BOK 3.0. And what are some things that could be changing in the future? Well, we know that new tools are going to be developed and adopted from other disciplines because it says that right in the document. It's an ever-changing document. Needs will continue to change within organizations. We also think that stakeholders will become more involved in a holistic planning approach. From the document as well, we think that we're going to grow our membership, and they will come from both existing and new sectors. So there will be new people that will need the BOK, and that members will want more e-tools. Those are just really some quick things that we thought about that could be possible future environmental scans with regards to the creation of BOK 3.0. So then, back to the systems thinking approach, we're going to look at phase A, and A is our ideal future. And this ideal future comes right out of the document. Propose a holistic approach to strategy management that explores the strategy life cycle and the set of interconnected and overlapping concepts, activities, and tools essential to successfully achieving desired strategic results. So, they've done a great job at creating this huge document with lots of really excellent stuff in it. So I thank any of the volunteers who were part of that. And it also serves as a key resource for those preparing to take the IASP exam. Two really big purposes for one document, which I think is why it can be overwhelming and difficult to use as a study guide. So now let's take a look at key success measures. This is from the document as well. This is what I think that we could get some feedback from the document on. Two areas: feedback from members on how useful it is in your work. So when you're a working strategy professional, you can go to this document, get examples of new tools, get ideas on processes, what you should be involved in, what are some of the steps you could be taking. So we could get some feedback from those people on how useful it is. And also feedback from members on the amount of help that it gave them in passing the certification exams. Since there's the two big outcomes, I think we should have at least two key success measures. Now, Louis talked about sometimes this is skipped over. Sometimes people don't develop key success measures because it's often difficult to do this. But what we want to do is talk about what's really important for us moving towards that ideal future. And even if it's difficult to measure, we will try to measure it. Now, on the left-hand side of the systems thinking approach are the inputs for action, and there's lots of them. So we came up with these ones. It's a volunteer-driven document. You have to remember that volunteers put a ton of hours into creating this, and we need to be very appreciative of the gift that they gave us. It took considerable time to create and to keep it updated. It's hard to understand for studying for exams. We're unsure of how closely linked BOK is to the exams. It's a key resource for members. It is strongly linked to the ideal future vision. It's broad and comprehensive for all members' use, which is one of the reasons why it might be difficult to use as a study tool. It has many tools and options in it. It has ideas and tools from other disciplines, which I particularly like, that we are not siloed and narrowly focused. We're actually borrowing from other disciplines. It's not seen as ever complete, but for people who are studying the exam. The BOK 3.0 is your book for studying the exam for now. And another thing is for the input is you need to assess your strengths and weaknesses related to the BOK 3.0. Where do you have some strengths and where do you have some weaknesses? And then to create the document, this is what they did. They created one document to meet the needs of members for their work, holistic approach to strategic management with options and tools, and a resource for exam prep. So they created one document to do that. And they nicely organized the document so it's divided into 5 sections. And those 5 sections are things that strategy professionals need to do throughout the year, all at the same time. They're not done in sequence, they're all done all at the same time. And then each of those 5 sections is broken down even further to help us make sense of it. Key concepts and definitions, key activities, and then the tools, which are a lot of approaches, methods, and techniques. So that's understanding a little bit about the creation of BOK 3.0. Now we're going to apply the systems thinking approach to how to pass it, which is really the reason that you're here. Most people put when they registered that they were thinking of taking the exam. So you really want to understand this approach to passing the exams. So as strategic thinkers, we're going to start in the upper right-hand corner, and you're going to do some type of external environmental scan. And I wasn't sure what this was going to be for your particular life, but you need to do this by yourself and think about what are some of the things that could impact you positively or negatively that could impact you passing the exams. So it could be something around your family, expecting a new child, be an unexpected illness, could be anything that could happen in your family or at work. Maybe you took study leave and it could be shortened. Maybe you didn't get a study leave. Maybe you're getting assigned to a new project and that's going to take a lot of time. Maybe the organization is reducing the amount they pay for courses. There's lots of things that you need to think about in that environmental scan. Use some kind of tool like Skeptic to take a look at what are the possible things that could happen to you. The what's, then you talk about, so what? What does this mean to me? What's the probability of it hitting me? Is it hitting me positive or negative? And then so what? What are you going to do about those things? And you put those into phase D. And then the phase A is pretty easy for passing the exam. It is passing the exam. And then our phase B, the measures of success is, did I pass or not? That's really the only metric we want to talk about. But let's talk a little bit more about the other parts of the systems thinking approach.
Thanks, Val. And just to recap for a moment, what Val's done in the last couple of slides is step through the ABC model that we apply to pretty much everything we do, but applied it at that sort of next highest level. Remember what Einstein said? Problems can't be solved at the same level of thinking that created them. So Valerie stepped us through an E, an environmental scan relating to the BOK, what was the context for its creation? And then A, what was the objective or desired outcome for creating the BOK? And there was dual purpose, and that's totally fine, but it can make it possibly a difficult thing to wrangle. And then the B phase after A is, well, how do we know whether it's working? And it's about, the effectiveness of it for assisting IASP members in their role as strategic leaders in their organizations or facilitators of strategy from a consulting perspective, but also the amount of effort it takes to actually become certified. Then C, she was talking about all of the necessary volunteer inputs and other things that were required to create it. And then D, she talked about the actual process of implementing the creation of BOK 3.0. So thanks, Valerie, for stepping us through the model at that highest level. Then the next level down is we're starting to get you to think about yourselves and working your way through that cycle. So now we've arrived at phase C. What are your personal inputs for action to successfully navigate the exam? And before we go into that detail, I just want to share an example of how we in the C phase, that current state assessment phase, we use lots of different tools in our consulting work, facilitation work with organisations. We use SWOT, which is one of our favourites. We never do it first. We do it as the current state assessment. We do the skeptic scanning, etc., and clarity of purpose around what are we trying to achieve, and then measures. And then we look at SWOT or use of other tools like the one I've got here on the screen, the business model canvas. And I love the business model canvas because it's a representation of an organisation as a system. Those 9 tiles or panels that sit inside the business model canvas that many of you be familiar with from Strategizer is actually an illustration of the 9 parts of a system, 9 parts of a business working as a system, all very integrated and interrelated for successful execution, but also sitting within the context of a rapidly changing external environment. So SWOT is another tool that we use at this input phase. And on the next slide, we start to talk about how that strengths, weaknesses analysis, it can be really important to helping you target where you're going to put your effort for the exam. So Valerie, next slide.
Okay.
So we've worked our way through the top part of these things, and there's a number of elements that will confront you when you're preparing for this exam, recognizing what the BOK is and where it's come from. It needs to be broad and comprehensive for a lot of, at least dual purposes, and it has many parts of it in terms of tools and options. It uses ideas and tools from other disciplines, and it's not ever a complete piece of work. But when you look at your own personal assessment of inputs for action, there's never enough time to do all the study that you want. There's always too many courses and books available to help you study. So which ones do I focus on? And understanding that the exam is also written by volunteers and connecting it to the BOK as well. So you need to be prepared and organise yourself for good support from family and your work environment to give you sufficient input and energy to work your way through the exam process. So thinking at the next layer down about you and your resources required as input for exams. And Valerie's going to share with us an interesting story of her own personal journey at focusing resources and efforts to pass exams. Thank you, Valerie.
Correct. So when I was studying for my first degree, calculus was a really difficult course for me. And there was a lot of content. It took me tons of time. And of course, there's never enough time. And so I started thinking about how could I apply systems thinking without even knowing what systems thinking was to studying and passing for calculus. And so I started thinking about the professor and the content and what was more likely to be on the exam. And I used some of these extra courses and materials that were available. There was something called the SHAM series that I used to do extra courses, to do extra exercises, to do extra reading. And I used other people to support me as well who understood calculus well. And then I caught on to calculus so well that I ended up being the person that people used to ask for help. So by applying systems thinking concepts around what do I think might be in the exam, what's what do I think the professor's going to ask to be on the exam, I ended up passing calculus, studying the right parts. And I used one example that I was struggling with in that SHAM series to go to the professor he liked the question so much that it ended up in the exam. But because him and I had worked through it, I had an advantage on the exam because I already knew the answer for that one. So by using systems thinking principles, we can pass the exam. So which is what you are very interested in. So let's take a look at what Lewe and I think are some of the implementation ideas for you to pass the SPP and SMP exams. First, review the BOK and highlight what you think will be in the exam and study here. Just like I did with calculus, what did I think was going to be on the exam and what did I think was not going to be on the exam? There's so much detail in this document. It's an amazing document, but what are you going to take a look at and what are you not? I don't think you should get into the tools in any kind of detail at all. I would review them at a very high level, understand what they are supposed to do only. Don't get into any of the details of the steps of the tools. I would also concentrate on your role as a strategy professional. If you aren't particularly involved in much in that area, then I wouldn't study it that much. Remember that volunteers are setting the exam. So look at bulleted lists. So when I helped create some of the questions for the original exam, I went to bulleted lists. It's a great place for volunteers to create questions. So take a look at all those bulleted lists that are in the BOK and remember that they could be on there. Review the definitions. They're really good concepts for you to know as a professional, but they're really good places that exam questions could be from. And then think about what are possible areas that they could ask questions about. There's some areas in the BOK that I think wouldn't be on the exam just because it's difficult to ask questions and structures around them. And they are things like regulations, policies, and guidelines, committees, reporting, and design principles of the BOK. So I wouldn't use any of those areas. Next, I would investigate additional things, just like I did the SHAM series. What courses and resources can help you in addition to BOK 3.0? So IASP has gone through and taken a look at some courses that they think are the ones that can help you. So take a look at all of those. Of course, Lewe and I think that ours is one you should consider, in my humble opinion. I'm giving it next week. They are four-hour sessions next week, and I'm also doing it again in April. So in my humble opinion, you might want to think about that if you're preparing for either the exams this fall or in the spring. I would also review additional articles and books that might be useful. I talked about the SHAM series books. See what kind of articles are good for you. At the Haines Center, we have 2 exam prep books. However, they are being updated right now at BOK 3.0. So I'm not sure they would be of value to you. You would have to decide that. I would also talk to people who have passed the exam before. What additional reading did they use that would be helpful? And then I think there's power in being part of a group. I would create a study group, pull people together that are going through the exact same thing as you, and create a group that works together. Talk about, as a group, what do you think is going to be in the exam and not? And then I would take parts of the BOK and get people to teach it to the others. Now, in order to understand something really well, you need to teach it because you need to get back behind things. You need to get above it and make sense of it and see how all the pieces fit together. So teaching something to someone else is an amazing way to learn something. And then also create possible exam questions to test yourself and others. I think that there's really so much that we can learn from each other. So those are the things I think you should be doing. Anybody have anything else that they would think they should be doing? Put it in the chat. What else might you want to do in addition to the things that we've thought of here for helping you pass the exam? Anybody think of anything else you would do?
And of course, Valerie, we like to use the ABC model to actually structure training and teaching of other people. Yeah, yep. So we ask ourselves what is the environmental context for the section of the BOK that we'd want to train or teach other people in. We asked ourselves the question, what's our desired outcome? Well, it would be for the rest of our study group to have a sufficient level of knowledge to be able to pass the exam. How do we know that the B is, how do we know if we get there? Well, we might even develop a little mini exam for the rest of the members of our group, so we can actually test them against some questions that we might create as part of the exercise. And then C is, where are we now, or what are the inputs for action? So different people within our group would maybe at different levels of understanding, and so accommodating that would be really important. And some people are better visual, other people are better auditory, so the delivery of our training would be influenced by the inputs for action. And then designing a little training session would be D, the implementation piece. So we applied the ABC model, the systems thinking model, at all different sorts of ways at all different levels because we know it works. You see anything in the chat there, Valerie?
No, I don't. So let's talk about some of our exam preparation resources that might be of interest to you. So the Systems Thinking Approach to Strategic Management, this is the original exam prep course. It has been updated to BOK 3.0. It's going to be happening next week, November 14, 15, 16, and 17, 4 hours per day live. It will also be recorded if you aren't there live or want to review it again. The outcomes for this online webinar are for you to learn the holistic approach to strategic management and change management, which we call strategic management. We're going to emphasize the IASP's BOK key concepts, definitions, and activities. We are going to review some of the tools that we use, but not all of them at all. There's also a really good book called Reinventing Strategic Planning, the Systems Thinking Approach, which is a really broad background and information about the systems thinking approach, how to be a good strategic management professional. It's an ebook. If you take the course above, it's included with the workshop. If you want to buy it separately, you can buy it at systemsthinkingpress.com. And there's 2 ebooks, Standards of Strategic Planning Field, Volumes 1 and 2, also available from systemsthinkingpress.com. They are presently being updated to BOK 3.0. Barbara Collins, who was another IASP pioneer and author of both of those books, is updating those right now. So a big thanks to Barbara for updating those to make sure that they are in line with the newest that's happening in the field. So who has any questions for Lewe and I with regards to the content, understanding systems thinking, applying systems thinking to passing the exams? Dean Black is also here if you have any questions about the actual exam and certification process. So if you have any questions, just type them into the chat and we will be answering them. So good question. Is there a structure to the exam, i.e. question order following the life cycle or cluster around a topic, or just random? Are the questions scenario based? Dean, can you answer this one?
Hi, yes, indeed. The strategy planning professional exam consists mostly of questions that are not scenario-based. The scenario-based or case study type of question is something we reserve for the SMP, the Strategy Management Professional Exam. With respect to structure, you can expect the questions to be aligned with the 4 competency domains, not necessarily the 5 that are reflected in the BOK 3.0, but the 4 domains. I'll open up the blueprint here and identify them. Just a moment. But
I really
strategy,
appreciate you being here, Dean, to
No.
answer these questions for us.
you're welcome. The strategy formulation, of course, is the first part of the structure. If I can get my other computer to cooperate here, there we are. Yeah, strategy formulation is domain 2. Engagement is domain 1. Preparation for strategy transformation is domain 3. And of course, domain 4 consists of strategy execution, governance, and evaluation. Those are how the questions and the exams themselves are structured.
Excellent, thank you. We have another good question. Can we have the record and the PDF of this session? And the answer to that is yes. If you want either of those, you can send me an email at valerie.mcleod@haynescenter.com. I'm the one that sent you the link for this. So you should still have it, and it is also in the next slide as well.
I might add to my response the
Yep.
Percentages of questions that
Oh,
fall
good.
into each of the domains. Again, there are 160 questions, 160 on each exam. And in the case of the strategy planning professional, SPP, 17% of the questions are from engagement, 26% from strategy formulation, 29% from preparation for strategy transformation, and 28% for strategy execution, governance, and evaluation.
Thank you, Dean. I'm going to actually put in the chat the link to that and if anybody's interested in taking a look at the systems thinking approach, our online workshop, which is next week as well as in April, instead of having to type that out. Does anyone else have any other questions? Just type them in the chat. Louis, anything you want to add?
No, Val, just move to the last slide so people can see your email was my only suggestion. And the bit that I'm curious about, maybe Dean, you could elaborate perhaps, is this is the first time, and maybe this is a new element of BOK 3.0, the word evaluation has appeared in the information that I was aware of that made up BOK 1 and 2. How strong is evaluating whether our strategy's working piece is an element of the BOK, just out of curiosity?
I can't respond to that quickly. I would have to go back into the BOK to see.
Yeah, you'd have to research it. Yeah, I'm just curious. Yeah. That word hadn't really was not prominent in the past. So I love it. I think it's wonderful that it's there.
What's interesting at the Haynes Center is we try to get people with diverse backgrounds, and you can tell Louis from Australia and I'm from Canada, and we've got different educational backgrounds. We work with different clients. We have different strengths and weaknesses. And I really appreciate Louis being on this session. We did one about 10 hours ago, which was daytime for him. But right now it's about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. where Louis is. So I very much appreciate Louis being around. It's wonderful to be part of a group. I talked about how important it was to be in a group for studying. And it's so important to work at a group as well and work off each other's strengths and weaknesses. So Louis has a big interest in evaluation. He does quite a bit of that. He's much better at it than I am. So I lean on him for that. Any other questions? You can put them in the chat. Well, if there's no other questions, and we'll wait in case somebody's typing something long, I'm going to be pressing enter. I want to thank everyone for being here. It's nice to see some names of people I know, people I've only met online, people I hope to know in the future. We hope that you got what you needed out of this session, that by thinking about the systems thinking approach, you can understand things better. You can apply this to any part of your life, passing the exam, designing a workshop, preparing for a meeting, planning for a trip, project management, all kinds of different levels. If you want a copy of the PDF and you want a copy of the video for this, you can email me at valerie.macleod@haydencenter.com. Thanks so much for everyone's attention, and I am going to stop the recording.
Thanks, Val. Cheerio, everyone.